From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. Growing up in the 90s, way before TikTok set the trends, it was Vogue, the magazine, that dictated what was fashionable. Their artistic, visionary covers inspired many, including our very own fashion editor, Harriet Walker.
One really striking one from the 90s, I think, it's Drew Barrymore in John Galliano for Dior, I think. She just looks like an absolute kind of fairy tale princess, almost like a watercolour, like a Watteau. It's hard to see that it's actually a photo, and she's next to a lion as well. Completely fabulous, yeah. And I remember seeing that as a teenager and just thinking, gosh, that's so beautiful. And also what a strange thing to be on a magazine rack next to, you know, Hello, which is just very sort of shiny white teeth. This thing was so dreamy and so perfect and so kind of inspirational, and I think that's the sort of legend of Vogue, isn't it?
At the helm of Vogue was, and still is, Anna Wintour, who at 74 is still leading the fashion pack. But how does she do it? As the Fashion Week season ends, we ask our in-house expert how Anna Wintour is still shaping the industry and whether she can remain relevant in a world of fast fashion and influencers. The story today, Anna Wintour, fashion icon.
I'm Harriet Walker and I'm the fashion editor at The Times.
That's a hell of a job. I mean, you must be in very busy season right now.
This time of year is very busy. The fashion weeks, when they happen in September and February, they run basically back to back. So it starts with New York, London, Milan, and then Paris. But I've been doing it a while now, so I feel like I have it down pat.
And it is Fashion Week season. There's just a succession of them back to back. This is the moment for the fashion calendar. One of the people who will be on every front row, inevitably, will be the woman with a bob, one of the most influential people in the world of fashion, Anna Wintour. Have you come across her?
You do. I think that's the strange thing about working in fashion, is that you're always in proximity to someone incredibly fabulous, often famous, in a way that is deeply unglamorous, actually, because although fashion shows are beautiful and lavish and opulent, they are essentially a trade show at heart. That's what they always were, sort of traditionally. Obviously, they've opened up to the A-list now. But you're all crammed in on benches next to each other, probably with not quite as much space as you'd like. Especially in Paris, the PRs always lay the seats out for very small French bums. So there's never quite enough space. But I have been in proximity to Anna Wintour over the past 15 years of my career. You know when she enters the room because she has a security detail. She's always the last one in, probably the last one, and then Rihanna, maybe 45 minutes later. And then she's often the first one out because she has to get to the next show or, you know, round of appointments. And often it is like bowling pins with those security guards because they just get her out.
And what's she like in person?
I've never worked for her, I must say, but I've been at events where Anna's been speaking. She does lots of kind of women in journalism, kind of outreaches, lunches, speaking to groups, trying to get people into journalism. In those sorts of situations, she comes across as very warm. She's witty and human.
I know you all have come here with very specific interests, law, art history, philosophy, and I'm sure you all prepared brilliantly to be the very best in your field at the ripe age of, 20? And that commitment is wonderful.
And I think she knows about this mythology that's sort of sprung up around her and her image. I think to some extent she's welcomed it and helped it grow, as it were. She plays up to it.
I read in the New York Times this week that I'm an ice queen. I'm the Sun King. I'm an alien fleeing from District 9, and I'm a dominatrix. So I reckon that makes me a lukewarm royalty with a whip from outer space. What do you think?
Good gig.
When I was writing about her recently for the paper, it was off the back of this new series, this Disney series about Vogue over the past 3 decades, but that is intrinsically linked to her.
What's the defining publication about fashion?
Vogue. 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 Vogue.
course, Vogue's biggest force is Anna Wintour.
Oh my God.
One of the first scenes is this cameraman sort of guilelessly going in and saying, "Okay, we're going to start. Can you take your sunglasses off?"
Anna, I'm sorry to ask you, would you mind awfully taking your sunglasses off?
No, I'm going to wear them.
So she does the whole interview with the specs on, but why not, actually? And also, I think it's all kind of part of the mystique, isn't it? That's why we're so fascinated.
And have you encountered that? Have you come across her personally?
I have, very, very briefly. Last September, The Times actually broke the story of the new editor, Cho Minardi, who was starting at the British edition before Vogue or Condé Nast had announced it, which meant before Anna had given the green light for the news to be out there. Anyway, we broke the story. I wrote it, very, very pleased with myself, obviously. And then I think it was the next night, so the night after that paper had come out with the story in and it was on the front, I had to go to an event. It was called a Vogue World. It was a kind of theatre show. It was a big sort of charity fundraiser that Anna and her team had put on in London. And she was at the head of the red carpet greeting everyone as they came in. And I went up there and stuck my hand out and she shook it. And the person next to her said, "Oh, this is Harriet Walker from The Times." And she went, And that was it.
Oh dear.
Well, I don't know. She didn't seem displeased, but I think she's a very busy person and I clearly was not high on her list of priorities that evening.
Just for people who don't follow fashion and don't know as much about Anna Wintour, just give us a sense of some of the things that make her, the mythology around her. What is she known for in fashion circles?
Obviously, the way she looks has become part of modern fashion iconography. You see these things online where people have sort of redone the Barack Obama poster, but with her silhouette, the hope, that print. So there's a version of that. In this Disney series that's out, someone describes her as a famous Warholian haircut. That's just as her essence.
That's her essence.
Which I love. In that piece, it really tickled me that it was this sort of Anna Wintour linking up with Disney because it seems like the two most famous silhouettes of 20th century America anyway. It's Mickey's ears and Anna's bob. You would know it in outline. I got a text from a friend maybe last summer who was watching the tennis at Queen's. It was a picture of the back of the bob. No words needed. We knew exactly who was in town.
The back of the bob.
Yeah.
But typically at the tennis.
Of course, yes.
It's something she's obsessed with.
She is. She's a huge fan. Yeah, I think it's a real part of her life. Spectating, playing. I think she plays every weekend. I think she gets up very early in the morning to play.
Part of the mythology around her is with all the crazy rumours. So just give us a very quick guide to the ones that you think are real and aren't.
Oh, there's so many of them.
Does she really have her haircut every morning at 8 a.m?
That's got a bit Chinese whispers, I think. She has a visit from her hairdresser every day. I couldn't tell you whether it's 8 a.m. or not, but the New York Times did an interview with him. He's a really great hairdresser in New York called Andreas Anastasis, I think. And he goes around to her house every single morning, whether to blow dry it or to check the colour or maybe trim it or to keep it immaculate. Whatever it needs. It's like watering a plant, isn't it?
I mean, it's amazing that somebody does that. They have a daily hairdresser coming in, but it says a lot that the New York Times would ask about it. What are the other rumours? What do we know about her?
A lot of what we think we know came from a book that I'm sure you're familiar with called The Devil Wears Prada.
And the film that followed.
Which was turned into a film the year I graduated from university and then was interning at various fashion magazines. And at the time, I think I thought, oh, great, I'm going to be living this life. And I actually rewatched that film recently and I thought, why on earth did I want to live this life? Anyway, it's a very nice life now. But as an intern then, magazines were hierarchical and tough and often quite unpleasant places to be. But the rumours that came from The Devil Wears Prada involved, I think, a lot of the hair maintenance, the legend of her lunch, which was always, it had to be a steak from a very particular restaurant, cooked just perfectly with a side of spinach every day, and it would come on the actual sort of plate from the restaurant with the cover on. It couldn't be in like a takeaway box or something. So there was that. There was a rumour about a certain temperature of water, but that sounds, I think, made up.
Oh, wow. And just give us a sense of her influence, in both fashion but also beyond. I mean, how powerful is she?
She's immensely powerful. I mean, her job title now is Chief Content Officer for all of Condé Nast. She's Global Editorial Director for Vogue, which means she has kind of final oversight of every single edition around the world, and there are so many. All of those editions used to have their own sort of individual editors, but now the magazine works in a sort of hub format. They create content that is sent out to lots of different countries. They share cover shoots. But even beyond the world of publishing, her word is law in fashion. Really, she has the power to make or break, and genuinely she tends to make rather than break. If she thinks someone's talent is worthy of appreciation, she will, I think, do her utmost to get them the publicity they need, to try and slot young designers in at designer brands or at houses that are looking for new creative directors. And also, I suppose, her influence is felt in the celebrity realm. Her tenure at Vogue really sped up or kicked off really that sort of symbiotic relationship between fashion and Hollywood that now seems a very natural fit. But when she took over, fashion really was a much smaller scale, quite inward-looking, private clients, retail, almost more like a trade show, really not open to being a sort of public spectacle at all. And that has changed on her watch.
But you sort of get a sense of the scale of her influence.
Totally. I think the scale of her network as well, because in recent years, I think we've seen also it extends far beyond fashion, far beyond Hollywood or music, and actually into politics as well. She's very, very involved in Democratic Party fundraising and keeping the show on the road in America. So I think this year is going to be really interesting. But the way she does work between all of these sort of spheres is sort of emblematic of how she has run Vogue, sort of taken it from the late 80s when she started into this 21st century machine, because obviously huge changes in the media landscape in that time, in the fashion landscape as well, and she has always maintained its relevance. That is a real key focus. I think that's what kind of drives her and always has done, is ahead of the curve, people call it, but I think just maintaining this relevance, which in the internet age is not easy.
If you're enjoying this episode of The Story, you can listen to more by subscribing to the podcast. It's completely free, and we'll put a link below in the description box for different ways you can follow us. A lot of us formed our opinions of who she must be from books and films like Devil Wears Prada. There have been documentaries about her. There's a new one out now. I know you've seen it. She rarely gives interviews. What do we know about how she got to where she is?
Well, she comes from a media family, I suppose. Her father, Charles, was the editor of the Evening Standard in London. She was born in London in that she is of that generation, that post-war generation who grew up in swinging London, I guess. London was a real kind of cultural epicenter of things, cool things that were going on among young people, but also part of a generation that did change what had gone before, that sort of youthquake moment. She finished school, but she didn't do university. I think from reading various biographies of her, I think that her impetus was just to get out there and do something. She started out as an assistant at various magazines. I think she was at Harper's and Queen. I think she was at British Vogue for a while. And eventually she sort of transferred to the States. She went to Harper's Bazaar in America, I think. And she doesn't do interviews very often, but she has talked about that job a few times because she was actually fired from it.
I think it was the French fashion shows, and I decided that it would be interesting to have dreadlocks on the models, and I think that pushed them further than they could bear. So that was it for me. But
which is interesting, and that does sort of tally with things that she's done throughout her career to try and push things forward and just to make a mark and look very different, because that would have been incredibly progressive. She realised then that perhaps her talents or her future was not going to lie in styling, like behind a camera necessarily. I think it seems obvious from the few interviews she has done that she's always wanted to kind of mould the entire vision of a magazine rather than twiddling about on a few pages here and there.
Well, how does that happen? How does she go from being fired at Harper's Bazaar to climbing the top of Vogue?
Well, she comes back to Britain, where I suspect some of the more progressive ideas for shoots or for visions were easier to get past the high-ups, I think. British pop culture has always been slightly more irreverent than American. And I think that her ideas in the context of London were probably quite exciting, whereas people tend to play it quite safe in America. So she ended up at British Vogue. She ended up editing that. She worked there alongside a stylist called Grace Coddington, who you may have heard of. She, in later life, has become quite famous. She's got this auburn hair, very, very striking. She transferred from British Vogue to American Vogue when Anna Wintour went over. So they've worked together for a very, very long time. Grace Coddington is very concept-y, quite ethereal, wants to see the art of fashion and do these amazing shoots that are quite out there. And Anna is always the one reining it in and saying, well, no one would wear that. No, that's ugly. You can't do that, you know.
Bring it back to Model Sal.
Exactly.
And you say that she was sort of a bit more progressive, a bit more sort of free-thinking than the American market was quite ready for. So she comes to Britain where she does better. Just give us a sense of how revolutionary she was at the time. Tell us about her first cover.
Well, her first cover in America was really sort of poured over when it came out, because it was very, very different. The sort of classic look of Vogue, of all Vogues at the time, really was a close-up of a model's face, very glossy, quite a lot of makeup, probably some very big hair going on. It was the 80s. And Anna Wintour's first cover was, by that standard, very pared back and also pulled back. The model's called Michaela Bercu. She was wearing jeans. Yeah, jeans were seen as workwear, if not sort of slobwear at this point. Nothing designer about them. The pair she was wearing were Guess, which is a very commercial brand, super mainstream, very accessible. Luckily, she is wearing it with a Christian Lacroix couture jacket beaded with a giant crucifix. Again, it was the 80s. But this was kind of revolutionary, and Michaela is smiling. She has quite loose hair. She doesn't seem done and starched and lacquered in the way that many of the cover models were before. And the public reaction was surprise. Some people really disliked it. They thought it was really informal. Apparently also the printers, when they got it, had to check that there hadn't been a mistake when this image came through.
Is this actually the cover of Vogue?
Yeah, exactly. It's funny looking back at this stuff now because it does seem quite tame. It's so familiar seeing someone in jeans on a cover.
Yeah.
But it wasn't them.
I mean, how much did she manage to shake things up at Vogue and other fashion magazines?
Hugely is the answer. When you go somewhere like American Vogue, it's such a sort of society pillar in that country, as it is here, but I think there is that slight British thing of being a bit wry and a bit mickey-taking at any opportunity. So it does kind of hit differently in America when people play with form and what's expected of these magazines. There's a great anecdote in this Disney series where Anna Wintour is on a plane, a Concorde, coming back, I think, from having got the job in the States or maybe going there, but very soon after she'd accepted it, she ends up sitting next to a man in a suit on a plane who says, you know, who are you? What do you do? And when he finds out that she's taking over this editorship, he says, oh, I'm so delighted. You know, I love Vogue. Vogue for me is all about Audrey Hepburn and Grace Kelly and the elegance. And, you know, it could never be Madonna, never someone like that. It's all about high elegance, classic femininity. And what I love about that story is that Anna Wintour got off the plane and thought, right, I'm going to put Madonna on the cover.
Really? Constantly challenging perceptions.
Which again was a massive departure because Madonna's, you know, young, raunchy, a music star, not a fashion icon at that point. And the image that she chose of Madonna is really interesting because it's very natural looking, it's very pared back, it's not big hair, it's not loads of makeup. And that actually is almost a sort of headshot. That really was a departure, and a departure from that sort of atelier fashion, but also it brought Vogue to a whole new audience, to, you know, youth culture that was used to this sense of rebellion and hadn't found it in Vogue until then.
And there's been a lot more of that, this sort of almost rebellion, but also celebrity culture into the world of high fashion.
I mean, into everything now, right? You can't really survive without celebrities if you're trying to make and sell a product. Anna Wintour realised this ahead of most other people. And yes, you see from that early stage of taking over at the magazine that celebrities are brought in more and more. I think it's the time of the era of supermodels who are obviously fashion personalities, but who became celebrities in their own right.
Yeah. And there was that sort of turning models into celebrities, like the supermodels, but also having more unexpected celebrities on the covers.
I think that's something that that Vogue has kept up with. That is a kind of calling card for the magazine. Anna Wintour put Michelle Obama on the cover shortly after that election victory. And that was really striking when that came out as well, because she is obviously highly styled and posed, but she's sleeveless. She's in a dress that is sleeveless, so her arms are out, and this prompted much discussion about the First Lady's biceps. But yeah, just very, very different looking to what had come before, and always, I think, slightly less deferent with every decade that goes by.
For Anna Wintour, she clearly has a lot of sway in the fashion world. She can make designers cool, she can make them disappear. How does she manage to stay relevant? I mean, she's 74. How is she still the person who tells young people how to dress or what should be desirable?
What she has always done well is to surround herself with people who are not just sort of switched on, plugged in, cool, but different to her. I think that has been a real strategic plank in her career. We talked about Grace Coddington, who's obviously, I think, artistically very different to how Wintour presents things, much more ethereal, much more kind of airy-fairy, less hard sell. Anna Wintour brought in a stylist called Edward Enninful, who was the editor at British Vogue. He stepped back last year. And she got him into Vogue from a magazine called ID, which was a very sort of a much smaller scale kind of youth Bible in London in the late 80s and early 90s. It really was a kind of focus on youth culture and only youth culture. I think for a while, all of their fashion shoots were just people who they'd found walking down the street in what they were actually wearing. That was, it was early street style. They were sort of the pioneers of doing that. And in the early 90s in London, ID was a really big deal because the things it was covering were the things that were becoming cool in mainstream fashion as well. So Kate Moss, grunge, the beginnings of Britpop, I guess, all a very, very different look from that fully lacquered, very made-up supermodel, glam American Vogue look. So much so that among younger people, that American Vogue look began to seem very dated. And I think there were lots of women in America who felt slightly lost. I really wanted to look like Linda Evangelista. I've got my hair and my nails done, and here's Kate Moss in a tank top. And so by bringing in Edward Enninful as an example, Anna sort of managed to reinvent the wheel once again. It's not just him. She has a whole team of other stylists and journalists and writers. But I think that is, the key to any successful business is not to be a dictator, is it? Or you can dictate rather, but you have the team in place to help you be a tyrant.
And is it still working? Because she seems more powerful than ever. She's taken over not just American Vogue, but all of them. She's a huge figure in the fashion world, but is she actually still having the influence she used to on what we all wear? Or is that coming from elsewhere now?
I think that her influence has changed, certainly. I wouldn't say it has waned, but I think just the rise of the internet and TikTok and people getting dressed in their bedrooms has changed things. I don't know whether it was ever Anna Wintour deciding from her office what the trends would be every season. It was more that her people and her magazines will sort of editorialize them, decide how to spin them, decide which ones get the biggest showing, decide how to do them in a Vogue way. There's definitely, I think, this TikTok wave is massive. But I think actually what we're seeing from that is something quite boring in that what you get on TikTok are lots of people for a week, say, dressing like a goth or a wizard or in very sporty clothes, and then the next week it's something else. And so none of these things actually stick. What has stuck, perhaps it's a sort of reaction to the sped up, the warp speed of trends, is this very sort of uniform, classic, quite minimalist. I think we're in a moment of, I've mentioned before, blazers, T-shirts, jeans, loafers. It's very neutral out there. My colleague Anna Murphy coined the term borecore of just...
Is that what we're all aspiring to?
Dullsville fashion.
And how does Anna Wintour fit into a world where borecore rules?
Well, she's always been quite a classic dresser herself, I suppose. It's sort of classically elegant, but often she'll be wearing quite a modern print or quite a bright colour. I think that There was definitely, 10 years ago, less so now, but if you were a fashion editor in New York, you didn't wear flat shoes. You certainly didn't wear trainers. And that was probably the Anna Wintour effect. I do wonder sometimes how she feels about, the rise of Crocs, baseball caps, that sort of tech bro look. It's hard to make the case for dressing formally after the pandemic, I think, sort of trainers and elasticated waistbands. I don't think even Anna Wintour will prize those out of our grasp, but I do wonder what she makes of it all.
That was Harriet Walker, fashion editor for The Times. She's just wrapping up at Paris Fashion Week, but you can read all of her recent reports from the front row, from Fendi's Virginia Woolf inspiration to Madonna's recent appearance at thetimes.com with a subscription. And if you're looking for another culture fix, we'll put a link to our latest episode on Sally Rooney's new book in the description to this podcast. The producer today was Priyanka Deladia. The executive producers were Kate Ford and Fiona Leach. Sound design was by Tom Birchall, and the theme tune was by Mal Lassetto. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.